Hi there. On today's episode, I talk about the Canmore Half Marathon and training, and I have part one of my conversation with local MSer Neil Blue. Stick around. So this past Sunday, I ran the half marathon, the Cause Canada half marathon in Canmore, Alberta, which I thought, since it's only going to be, 21 kilometers, I thought, no problem. But the reality is I haven't been really doing a lot of training since the really long run. So, I've mostly been running 5 and 10Ks, and haven't really been in a regular program. So it took me longer than I would have liked. It was and that half marathon is it's difficult because the last when you hit about just over the halfway mark, you start going uphill until you come to about the 3/4 of the way mark, and there's some pretty steep climbs, but no excuse. The reality is I didn't train. This may sound really stupid or silly, but I don't know what I was thinking. But obviously, you need to be, even after you've run an ultra distance, you still need to be preparing and training correctly for something like that. So, but it was a great event. It was pretty. I was pretty interesting when we got there in the morning. The race started at 8:45, and when we got to the school near downtown Canmore there, where you start and finish, the rain was pretty heavy, and I thought, whoa boy, this is going to be interesting. And I prepared. We checked the weather before we left Edmonton to go to Canmore, and knew that it was potentially could rain, but it was coming down pretty good. And when we were standing sort of at the starting gate, it was coming down, but it wasn't coming down. It had lightened up. But I still thought, man, this is going to be an interesting morning. And, I carried my backpack with me, my Camelback with my water, but it's also got places where I can put stuff. So I was well layered with clothing and that. But the amazing thing is, about I'd say, probably 8 kilometers in, the weather started to change, and by about the 10K mark, the clouds parted, blue sky. I actually got too hot. I had to take off my outer coat, my long sleeve, and then pack it in my pack. And then by the time I got back to the finish line, it clouded over again, and just as we were getting in the car, it started to rain. So it worked out pretty good. It was a really good weekend. And I did have, amazingly enough, presence of mind. At one point, I was running along the river that goes through Canmore there, and it was just one of those rare. I don't know if any of you have ever run a marathon, but for the most part, you're generally in a group of people, and usually 10, 15, 20 minutes into a run, you generally end up with this in a group of people that are at your speed, and you see those people pretty much throughout the rest of the day. They'll pass you, you'll pass them. They'll stop to adjust, and you'll pass them. Then you stop to adjust, and you pass. But you're generally in the same group. But anyway, I was beside this river, and I found myself kind of just by myself, sort of in this treat area. And I thought, maybe I should record some audio for the podcast while I'm running. And, here it is. So I got about 5K to go in the Canmore half marathon. And for any runners listening, little tip: even if you run a ultra marathon in May, not training for a half marathon in September, big time mistake. It's not that I'm not going to finish, but this 20K will be slower than the first 20K of the really long run. So, I should have probably trained a little better, but what are you going to do?
the guy leading this thing, there's a point where at the 10K mark where the runners that are ahead are passing you going the other way. He passed me at the 10K mark. So that means he was a full 10 kilometers ahead. I mean, obviously the guy was built like a gazelle. And he's probably not pushing 40 years old. Probably doesn't have MS, but still, as much jealous as I am, good for him. Because he was just trucking. I'd have to guess he was running, probably 4 minutes a kilometer, somewhere in there. Anyway, this is just a quick update from the trail. Update.
So that was just a short snippet from my run in Canmore. And yeah, like I said, when I mentioned in that little clip, the guy that was leading that race, I don't know if he was running 4 minutes a click or 3.5 minutes a click or whatever, but like I said, there's a marker on the course that says you're at the 10K point, and there's markers as you hit various distances. But at the 10K point, the runners that are ahead are actually running towards you on the other side. And it was at the 10K mark he passed me going the other way, and that meant that he was 10 kilometers ahead of me, and just really impressive. And even the guy that was behind him, the second place guy, he would have been a good 2 or 3 clicks behind the leader. So I don't know who that guy was, but hats off to him. That was pretty impressive stuff. So anyway, getting to the most important part of the podcast. This podcast is part 1 of my conversation with Neil Blue. And Neil and I met as a result of the really long run. He saw one of the news reports. I don't know if it was on Global or CTV or whatnot, but he had saw one of the reports on the really long run on TV, and it was actually his mom who friended me on Facebook first, and then Neil afterwards, and then I had a chance to meet Neil at the bike tour, and we actually met up on stage when they asked all the MSers who rode the bike tour that day to come up on stage. And I tell the story more in the conversation with Neil, but anyway, that's how we met. And then through my interaction with Neil, I believe is about 2 years into his journey with the disease, and he's a spark plug. He has a lot of really great ideas, and we ended up splitting this into 2 parts because we started at a coffee shop near Grant McEwen, and then he had to go a day, and then we met at Bourbon Street in West Edmonton Mall, and we actually sat out on Bourbon Street at the little tiny patio that's at Sherlock Holmes right as you enter in Bourbon Street. So part 1 is our conversation at the coffee shop downtown, and then part 2, which will come up in 2 weeks, will be our conversation at the Sherlock Holmes in West Edmonton Mall. Things I can say about Neil: he's driven. He recently had a really good MRI where a lot of the lesions were reversed. Again, you'll hear that in our talk. The striking thing about him, I mean, even being so young into being diagnosed, his goal is to get a mentorship program off the ground. And now I understand, actually we're texting with Neil just this morning as I was recording this, that the MS Society has started something similar. And I, with no doubt in my mind, probably because of Neil's urging and his efforts, because he has made people at the MS Society aware of what he wanted to do. So in this conversation we talk about the membership program. We talk about our relationships. I had to tell him, I mean, part of the story was that you'll hear is I was explained to Neil how I met my wife, and he talks about his relationship with a lady named Jessica that I have not met yet. He also talks about how his relationships with his friends and his family have evolved, and things he's had to give up and things he's had to change, and But overall, Neil has a really, really positive outlook on his disease, and I really recommend it. Just listening to anyone who has MS or recently diagnosed, and yeah. Thanks again, Neil, for taking the time to talk to me. I think that it was I'm glad it's going to be stretched into two parts because I think you have a lot of really great things to say to everyone in our community. And yeah, here's our conversation, and I hope it's helpful. Okay, I'm sitting here at Neil. We're at a coffee shop near Grant MacEwan. Neil, thanks for taking the time to join me.
Thanks so much. I'm really happy to be here.
And Neil, why don't we just start off? You just tell me how MS came about in your life.
Yeah, so a few years ago, a long time ago now, I guess, when I was 16, I raised $10,000 for the MS Society. My uncle, he's fully disabled from MS, and my great aunt also has MS. So I kind of wanted to, I guess, raise some money to help them with that. After that, fast forward a few years later, I'm 24 and I got diagnosed. So that's how it all came to be.
And you and I sort of met as a result of the run that I did. We met on stage actually at the MS Bike Tour, and it's kind of a funny story because I said to you on stage, why don't you add me on Facebook, and you'd already added me, so I do apologize. My memory's not so good. I blame the MS. But as a result of this meeting, you had mentioned a program you're trying to get off the ground, and I'd love it if you tell the listeners what that is.
Yeah, so when I first got diagnosed, I really looked to some role models, I guess, that had MS. So I had heard about you, of course, and I thought that was great, what you were doing. And I was in contact with this gentleman who had been diagnosed when he was 24, and now he's 34. And he was on the same medication that I was on, and he gave me a lot of advice on how I should go about it, how I should go about the relationships, everything, not just the physical effects of MS, but I mean the mental side and how he changed his life around. And hearing stories from those people was instrumental to me in the beginning. So what I would like to do, and it's what I've been putting out to the MS community and the MS Society, is start a program, and I call it the MS Mentor Program. But it's just a way for people to be matched with other individuals with MS who have similar interests. So, for example, you like hockey and I like hockey. So if this program were started and I was just recently diagnosed, we would look at, okay, some of the interests that they like hockey, they like sports, they're this sort of, and we try to match them. It'd almost be like a dating site for MS, but it's not dating, right? It's just matching someone with similar interests. Because it made it easier for me to talk to him, because I really related to him. And because of that, I've had great success with MS, as you've seen with my recent scans. My lesions decreased a lot, and yeah.
Can you elaborate on that when you said your recent scams? I think that would be something that would be really interesting to hear about, because that was pretty exciting when you shared that with me.
Yeah, it was really cool. It was pretty emotional. All of you out there listening to this can't see the pictures, but I have them up on my Facebook page, and I wanted to show a lot of people that were there for me the results of my labors, and basically a lot of my lesions completely disappeared. Basically, there's still a small lesion there that you can't see that'll leave a lingering symptom, but overall my symptoms are decreased tenfold. I went from not being able to see anything in my left eye to being 95% recovered, according to my optometrist. I can't really tell. Some days it's bad, some days it's better, but I mean, it was those were the results that I had. It was really great.
Now, before we started recording, you kind of mentioned how
you have done some lifestyle modification. You're taking Copaxone, and to get a scan like that where I mean it's basically reversing itself. Now I know you don't know for sure, but what do you think? What do you think what caused that? What do you attribute that to? What do you think happened?
Well, firstly, I just want to say, with that, I don't believe that there's any one thing that will cure someone. There's no miracle cure for MS. I would attribute it to a lot of different things. So one, the medication I chose was perfect for me. It was the one that didn't cause depression, which is why I chose it. Um, and it was the one with the least amount of side effects. So definitely the medication, but also diet. I changed my diet tenfold, and that was also because of the MS mentor that I was mentioning earlier. He told me you need to try different things until you find something that works for you. So I cut out dairy and red meat, and a bunch of other things, and that seemed to really work for me. And there's a lot of smaller things too, like exercise. I couldn't exercise because I could barely stand, but anytime I could walk, I would try to walk as far as I could, and as long as I could. I got involved in a sports team, Southwest Zone Oil Kings. I started being assistant coach there, a team that I used to play for, and that was good for my mental health because I had to give up sports. I also credit getting a psychologist early on to deal with everything. It was huge for me. It helped me learn how to deal with the pain. It taught me different methods to deal with the pain. And I think all of those things in combination, and maintain a positive outlook and continuing to fight, even when I gained all that weight, and keeping that positive outlook and doing all those things made the difference for me. It was everything in combination. It wasn't just one thing.
Now you mentioned when we first started talking that you have a bit of a higher stress job, and one of the recurring themes as I've been talking to other MSers is stress is a trigger. So if you have a high stress job, how are you managing your stress? Is there any techniques or tools or are things that you're doing that helps you to manage that?
Yeah, well, firstly, it comes back to how you want to deal with your diagnosis, and that comes from when I talked to my psychologist. She said there's different ways to deal with this. You can keep it in, like a lot of people do, or you can talk to people about it, be really open. For me, I was really open, and part of it was because of my job. I had to tell my bosses what was going on. My work was suffering immensely. I'm sure a lot of MSers, they suffer too at work. So, I was really open with them and told them what's going on, and just told them I need to get stable and I just need to get my feet under me, and that decreased my stress a lot, and that helped. That helped huge. I mean, them doing that was really important for me to have the recovery that I did, and then past that, I just tried to make sure that I communicate with them to let them know when I'm overwhelmed or what's too much or what's not enough. And they're really accommodating, and employers have a duty or responsibility to do that, right? They have to try to accommodate you. And I guess just communication with them is very, very important if you want to have success in the workplace. And I think that now that I'm feeling better and I'm having that success that I want, so that's good.
So you're in your mid-20s, and you get this diagnosis, and you already knew a bunch about it from family members that had it. But you mentioned to me before we started recording that you didn't cry about it. So what was your thought process like then, and how do you feel now?
Yeah, well, like I was saying to you, when I first got diagnosed, I knew what it was, and I knew what the challenges were going to be. I was scared, but I just knew that it was going to be a challenge, and I like to always try my best at anything, even if I don't do well. I like to just give it my best, right? And that's kind of how I looked at it. Like I said to you too, I was more emotional about actually having to give up hockey. That was hard. But you work around it, I guess. And my mindset now would be really happy. You know, I'm really happy with the type of challenges it's presented with me. It's made me, I think, a better person. Not that I wasn't a good person before. I think I was. It's just, it's definitely challenged me in ways that I wouldn't have been challenged before, and it made me more humble, and I cherish more things that are important in life, I guess, as lame as that sounds. But I mean, when you're in your younger 20s, you're just, you know, a partier, or you're, you know, whatever, you're stupid, and you take things for granted, and especially your health, and the quality of the life I want to live, I realize is important to me, and I continue to work on those things that I know I need to do to have good health, and that takes precedence over everything else. And yeah, I guess that's my mindset, is just I'm pretty happy. I mean, I still have my symptoms. It's still harder than some people have, but I mean, yeah, I guess just pretty happy with where I'm at.
And again, when we first started talking, you said that you were in the middle of an attack when you saw me on TV, and your exact words was like, "Hey, that guy's a bit of is a bit of a badass." And truth be told, listening to what you just said, prior to my diagnosis, and even early on after I got diagnosed, I was a bit of a badass, but not for good reasons. I mean, you mentioned partying, in your early 20s. I was still doing that in my early 30s, and and I think that probably, and again, it's nothing I can prove, but I think it probably contributed to developing it. Maybe I would have developed it later in life. Maybe I wouldn't have, and maybe it had nothing to do with it. But I have a suspicion that living a hard life like that's not the healthiest thing to do. So I had to give all that up. So I mean, when you look at you gave up hockey. Outside of hockey, are there other things that are really tough to give up, or is there something that you look back and you go, it's tough that I had to give it, or is it specifically just hockey for you? And also, before I hand you the microphone back, I'm going to ask you one other question. Outside of giving up stuff, how did your family and your social circle react? And what was how did they react to you?
All right, well, let's start with the social circle. I think that one's probably quicker and easier. My friends were great, very supportive, and they were looking up stuff and sending me articles and wanting to get involved. And I have really great friends, like really, really good friends, and I'm very lucky to have them in my life. It was hard, right? Because they don't know how to be there for you, right? Like when someone gets diagnosed, it's hard for them, but they wanted to be, and that was nice to see too. My family, they were very emotional. My mom took it really hard. Like on a personal note, I was moving out of the house too, and I'm the baby of the family, so she was really emotional, and she was having a lot of trouble with that. And the rest of my family kind of saw it as a death sentence in a way. I mean, you look at my family in particular; it's been tough, right? The disease. I mean, with my uncle and everything, and the family friend who was really sick with MS. It makes it hard for them to accept it. It was harder on them than me, I think. But yeah, overall, now they're doing much better with it. They see that I'm having success. I'm still doing my modules for school for accounting, and they see me, in a relationship. I'm not just gonna be some single, unhappy, miserable person, and I think they're happy for me. And I think my friends are really happy for me, and that's really important. And then the second part of that question was, oh yeah, what did I give up? So the hardest thing for me was definitely hockey. That was brutal. Even the summer before I started getting really sick, I was playing, in a competitive men's league, and playing with high skill players and playing with guys, really good guys, and it was a social thing for me to get to go out and see the guys and, go for drinks or whatever. And that's hard to give up, for sure. I think some of the other harder things to give up weren't that hard. Like, some people would say, oh, I could never give up dairy, or I could never give up beef, but I just said to myself, I need to get better and I need to do everything. And it was way easier than I thought it would be. I mean, it wasn't easy, but I mean, my family would have steak or whatever, and I'd just say, hey, can you make a chicken for me? I just can't do it. And they were pretty understanding. I think a lot of people are afraid when they start talking about their MS. This relates kind of to what I've been talking about for the last 2 points, but they're worried that people are going to judge them and not like them, but I don't think that's the case. Some people don't know how to take it, and so they might be a little awkward at first, but if they're your good friends, they'll be there for you and they'll understand. Your family will understand. And I think that's a huge fear for some people at first, but and to be honest, there's a few people that I did remove from my life, just for the simple fact of they didn't want to include someone who was sick, or maybe they saw me as weak, and I'm fine with that. And frankly, it's for the better right now. I know who my good friends are, and I'm super happy about where I'm at. And so that answers your questions, I hope.
Now, you just mentioned something about being weak. I think that anyone who will look at you as being weak, as somebody who's taken on MS head on, they're missing the boat. But that's my opinion. But you also touched on another interesting point, and this is kind of a two-parter, but it's really the same question. Like for me, I did everything backwards. I didn't meet my wife till after I got diagnosed. I didn't start having kids till after I got diagnosed. And my wife and I knew that the lady that I married was the person for me very early on. We met December 2009. We were engaged by the beginning of February 2010. I just knew, right? The single hardest moment in my life up to that point, other than hearing the diagnosis, was I didn't tell her right off the bat. I mean, you don't go for your first date and say, sit down. By the way, my Sean. Oh, by the way, I have MS, right? But I could tell it was going to get serious. So I remember, like it was yesterday, I had to turn to her and say, by the way, no, this is before I proposed, but this is when I knew. I mean, this is when I knew. I already knew before I said it, but this is when I knew it was ironclad in my head. I just looked at her and I said, Andrea, I've got to tell you something. And she thought, I can only imagine what was going through her head, but, I have to tell you something. And she looked at me, she's like, what is it? Because she could tell. I'm like, I have MS. And she, and I think I said, I have MS. If that changes anything for you, that's okay. But I have to tell you, because if this is going to get serious, if this is going to go further, you need to know. And she just looked at me and said, okay. And I said, okay, what? And she was just like, okay. That doesn't change anything for me. So that's when I knew for sure, this is it, right? And so anyway, my questions surrounding that is you mentioned you're in a relationship, and we talked a little bit about this before, about sort of coming out of the closet with your MS. If you could just kind of touch on that, and how was that experience for you?
Yeah, that's a good question. I think it's funny that I don't know how you didn't tell her for so long. I'm serious right now. I don't know how you did it. Like that's pretty special. I don't know how you did that, but yeah, I started dating a girl after I was diagnosed, and I said to her name's Jessica, and I said, she's actually the one who introduced me to my MS mentor, which was fortunate, because she knew him. But I said to her, I don't want a relationship. I'm sick. I don't feel good, and I don't want that. And she said, you're such a great guy, and I just want to be there for you, and I think you can get through this, and I don't care about that. And for me, that was really huge, because I don't know, when you're going through that and you're on the drugs and you're doing the steroids and you're gaining weight and you don't feel very desirable. You know, you feel like you're damaged. And she never made me feel like that. And I know that's a fear for a lot of MS patients, is dating and being afraid, like, oh, who's gonna love someone who's sick? And I don't know, there's two cases right here, like speaking to you and in my situation, where people look past that. Also think sometimes with MS, people can't tell. I said this to you before. People can't tell that you're sick, right? So a lot of times you think that the person you're going on a date with or you're seeing is going to notice, but in most cases they probably won't, right? And so I guess, yeah, you don't need to be too concerned about that, but I do think it's important you let them know that you have MS, because then that could be a deal breaker for some people. But if that's a deal breaker, like in our cases, I mean, then obviously it wasn't supposed to work out, right? I mean, and you're with your wife now, and you have 2 kids, so clearly it was good. But same for me, right? I mean, it worked out great, and we're super happy. And
Now, I should say, in fairness to my wife, I think now that she's gotten to know me over the past 5 years, that MS is probably the least of her worries, between the anxiety, the depression, the crazy ideas I have about running long distances. I think the MS is probably the easy one. So when you're embarking on a career, you're still doing some modules for your work. So when you look to the future, what does that look like to you? Do you plan your life around MS, or do you just plan your life like, or do you just say, you know what, I'm going to live my life and whatever happens, happens?
to be honest, when I first met my psychologist, she kind of gave me a really good way to look at everything as best case, worst case scenarios, right? And at the time, my worst case was, well, I'm having a lot of relapses. I'm getting really sick. What if this is a fast thing? What if I get worse diagnosis and I'm sick right away? Or what if I live a long time and I'm really happy? So I kind of came up with goals and plans based on that. One of my goals is to get my accounting designation. I really want to do that. I really want that. It's going to give me a lot of opportunity for once I have it, I can do so many different things in business. No matter what happens with my MS, I think it'll allow me opportunities to at least make a living so that I can support myself. And that's huge. So that's a big thing I want to do. It changed my outlook a little bit on terms of wanting to go out and make a ton of money. A lot of accounts are money driven. For me, I really want to start that MS mentor program really bad. That's my goal for 5 years. I want to get that off the ground and make it into something special. And even with the good diagnosis, that doesn't change my desire to do that. In terms of career, not too concerned, like I said. With my designation, I can do a lot of stuff. Whether that's in public accounting or private or not-for-profit or, whatever. I'm not too concerned about that at this time. More so, I'm only in my first year of having significant relapses, right? I mean, I've had it. I don't know about you. I think I was born with it, and I've had it my whole life. I had symptoms 2 years ago with pain in my neck, but my first really bad relapses started happening in this last year. I'm still getting used to it, so I don't want to get too far ahead of myself. I just need to still learn I'm still learning how to operate, right? I know you understand that, and anyone who has MS understands that. You're still learning. It's always a learning curve. Even years later, from what I understand, you're still trying to learn what your body can and can't do. So I'm still getting to that, and from there, we'll see what happens.
Now I'm going to shift gears a little bit. You strike me as the type of person that is cerebral in nature. So you would have probably looked into a lot of this stuff, and I'm just curious. Like I posted something on my blog the other day about how potentially solar activity and magnetic disturbances in our upper atmosphere potentially could cause MS. And it's actually a paper people. This isn't me. This is an actual academic paper they're working on. So I'm just curious to hear, like, do you have any theories of your own on how it might develop?
On how MS might develop specifically, honestly, I think it's a mystery to anyone. It's interesting to read that, because I did read a little bit of it. I don't know if that's all of it. I mean, it's genetic. I think it's a combination of things. I think it's your genetics. I think it's how far away you are from the equator, like you were saying, that whatever you call it. Yeah, that hypothesis that you posted. I don't. I tend not to think about stuff like that, just because I don't want to deal with any hypotheticals and start. It's like people who come up with random theories on how to cure MS. I was reading one the other day about a chiropractor, how he cures MS, and I thought that was the stupidest thing I've ever read in my whole life. I couldn't believe it. I go to a chiropractor a lot. He's a great guy. To say he cured my MS is absurd, but he definitely helps me, right? But I don't like dealing with too many things like that. I wouldn't want to take a stab at it. Even I think it's just a lot of different things. I think you're born with it, though. I think you have it from when you're little, and something triggers it, and that's what I think. Yeah.
It's interesting. You kind of touched on how you're born with it, and it's interesting. Just this morning, I came across an article, and I'm going to post about it on the blog too. How they're talking about gene therapy as a potential treatment, and because if you have this, I can't remember which gene it was, but if you have this one mutated gene, there seems to be a correlation between that and us. So it's interesting, and I agree with you. I mean, there's so many theories out there, and a lot of them are crackpot. My favorite of which I came across was there's a guy out of New Zealand that claims that he can cure MS by having you stung several times by bees. That I think that one still ranks up as my all-time favorite. But I always look into the current research just to see what's going on. Not because I think I can read something and maybe adapt something at home, like I can put something on the stove and but it's just more because I'm interested to see where the research is going. Now I'm going to shift gears again. You're a hockey fan, so I have to ask the question: is Connor McDavid a really good thing to happen to Edmonton, or the greatest thing ever to happen to Edmonton?
He's the biggest thing since Wayne Gretzky, right? I mean, he's going to be huge for the city and for our team for sure. I think you watch him, he's exciting. I talked to my friend about it who's drafted into the NHL, and he says he can't believe how good he is and how amazing he is. And I mean, it's when you start hearing all these players talk about him, Crosby making those comparisons, Wayne Gretzky talking about him, I mean, he's the real deal. We're lucky to have him for sure.
I probably caught you off guard with that one, but it's an Edmonton-based podcast. You got to talk about hockey, right?
That was part one of my conversation with Neil Blue. Part two will come up in 2 weeks when episode number 6 of the YEG MS podcast is released. Once again, I want to thank Neil for taking the time to talk to me and switch venues and being really open. In our next conversation, we touch on some more sensitive topics like the liberation treatment and other things like that, where, I mean, to be frank, I wasn't necessarily comfortable talking about because I know that they're sensitive issues to many in our community, but Neil pushed me to talk about them, and you'll hear that conversation in 2 weeks, and I appreciate Neil pushing me to talk about it. My goal with this is to never offend anyone, but at the same time, we have to feel comfortable enough that we can talk about the different issues that face us, and that's why I really appreciate Neil and getting to know him. Anyways, if you ever want to get a hold of me, you can find me on Twitter at ownms.com1. That's at OWNDOTCOM and the number 1. You can also send me an email to Sean, SEAN, at ownmultiplesclerosis.com. That's OWN multiplesclerosis.com. It's all one word. As I mentioned, I think on every one of these podcasts, if you ever want to be involved, or if you feel like you want to be involved with the Really Long Run next year in 2016, what'll be in May in 2016, and I'll have the date set sometime here in the next 2 weeks. Please get a hold of me if you want to volunteer, if you want to run 5K, 10K, 20K, heck, if you want to run the whole thing with me. Please reach out. And also, MS Bike Tour, I would like to get as many team members as possible for our team next year, for the Battered Piles bike team next year. We had 18 last year. This year I'd like to have 30. Dave Gordon, who you may have heard in a previous podcast, is another MSer who's on the team. And we've set that as a goal to try and get as many team members so we can, to raise as much money as possible. The Battered Piles were in the top 10 last year as far as fundraising goes. Because all the money from the Really Long Run goes to the Battered Piles Bike Team, which in turn then goes to the MS Society of Canada. Anyway, that's it for me for this episode. Like I said, if you want to get a hold of me, please do. And if you ever want to be a guest, reach out to me. I'd love to hear your story. Anyway, we'll talk to you in a couple weeks.